Welcome to my channel. My name is Lauren and I am self-converting my Ram ProMaster to live, travel, and work in full-time on the road. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I insulated the inside of my van using 3M Thinsulate insulation. As usual, check the timeline below for time codes that allow you to jump around to different sections of the video. And secondly, check the description box for affiliate links to products and tools I use. With that, let's get started. Insulation is probably the most controversial topic in the van life community. So I want to take some time to tell you why I chose 3M Thinsulate for my insulation. So if you're just here for the install, feel free to use the time codes below to jump ahead. Thinsulate's main purpose for being in the market today is for sound deadening automotives, so this is a great benefit if you choose this option. After installing it in my van, I can already tell a huge difference in the sound of my van. It's no longer this echoey metal box. In fact, I wish I would have completely skipped my kill mat sound deadening earlier in my van build and just relied solely on Thinsulate because it is that efficient at preventing road noise when you're driving, at preventing surrounding environment noises from entering my van, and to prevent the noises that I'm making in my van from leaving my van. So this would have saved me a lot of weight, time, and money. Although Thinsulate's primary purpose is for sound deadening automotives, it does have thermal properties. You might actually recognize the brand Thinsulate from some of your winter gear that you've purchased, like jackets, gloves, and even sleeping bags. So I have the SM600L, which has an R value of 5.2. So the R value is referring to a two-dimensional barrier and its ability to resist heat flow. So the larger the R value, the better it is at climate control. Another thing to note is that the R value does change by the material's thickness. Thinsulate is also hydrophobic, which means that it can resist moisture, mold, and mildew. When insulation has the ability to absorb water, this can actually lower the R value properties and can create mold, which would be a serious health concern. So to prevent water and moisture from getting trapped behind your walls, you want to make sure that you get an insulation that is breathable. Because of this, I immediately crossed off recycled denim from my list of options because it absorbs water and can mold very easily. You'll also want to find an insulation that doesn't invite bugs to live with you in the van. This is one reason why I decided not to go with wool, because when left untreated, wool can actually attract moths and other insects. Although some wool, like Havelock wool, can be washed and treated with a bug repellent, I still hear of some people complaining about a bug issue, and I know that some repellents can be toxic, so I just didn't want to risk it at all. Thankfully, with Thinsulate, I don't have to worry about this issue whatsoever. Thinsulate is also a non-toxic option. I don't want to be living in my van and breathing in these toxic fibers that can cause serious health concerns. Although you can install toxic insulation safely, once you start living in your van and driving, you're going to be creating all these vibrations which can loosen up those toxic fibers and potentially leak it into the air that you're going to be breathing in. Another thing is that toxic insulation sometimes can be itchy during install, so because of this, I immediately crossed off fiberglass from my list of options, as well as rock wool, which I was reading mixed reviews on its toxicity, but I figured I didn't want to risk it, so I just got rid of that option. Another criteria I was looking for was ease of installation. I wanted something that would be mess-free and material that would conform to the curved walls of my van easily, and also material that I can shove into all these ribs and crevices throughout my van. Because of this, I decided not to do any rigid foam board options such as polyiso, XPS, which stands for extruded polystyrene, and EPS, which stands for expanded polystyrene. Although rigid foam boards are probably the cheapest option for insulation, and you can find them at pretty much any home improvement big box store, they are a strong flat surface that would need to be cut precisely to the space on your wall for it to be installed, because it is not flexible and it wouldn't be able to fit into all those ribs and crevices throughout your van. However, of those three options, I will say in my opinion, XPS seems to be the better option. It is water resistant, non-toxic, has a good R value and good compressive strengths, whereas polyiso actually loses its R value as it gets colder, and then EPS also holds and retains moisture and water, which would lower its properties. Another thing I want to point out is for subfloors, I would highly recommend XPS because, like I said, it has high compressive strengths. So you can actually get this in 20 and 25 psi, whereas the human footstep is only 16 psi. So you don't have to worry about it losing its shape over time or losing its effectiveness when compressed at all underneath your subfloor. I would have loved to have used this for my subfloor, but like I said, I didn't have very much headspace to lose, so I decided not to insulate my subfloor. Just be sure that you glue it down properly, because if you don't, I do hear that it can be very squeaky when you're driving or walking on it, which would get very annoying very quickly. Furthermore, this meant that I would be crossing spray foam off my list of options because it is not very easy to install. Spray foam is very expensive, very messy, and very permanent. Once it is installed, there is no taking spray foam out of your van. It is also recommended that you have a professional install it, and as you know, I am trying to do as much of this van build by myself as I can. This option may also fill drain holes in your van that are there and serve a purpose and should not be filled. Although spray foam has a good R value and when it's installed properly can actually eliminate a lot of the condensation in your van, the pros did not outweigh the cons for me. As you will see very shortly, Thinsulate is very easy to install. It's as simple as measure, cut, spray, and stick. Doesn't get any easier than Thinsulate. Moving on, Thinsulate also has a good longevity. Because it is built for automotives, it tells me that it can withstand vibrations when I'm driving my vehicle and that the material is going to hold up and not deteriorate over time. Because of this, again, I decided not to go with Havelock wool, which is another very popular option in the van life community and was my runner-up to Thinsulate. The main reason is because I usually see people install Havelock wool with string or tape, and I just feared personally that over the years of driving and vibration that the wool might shift and you might create gaps and air gaps or thermal bridges that heat transfer can occur. So I didn't want to have to worry about this. I'm sure that there's ways to install it properly and that's going to last. Lastly, Thinsulate is also a very lightweight material, which is also very important during your van build because every little thing adds up and you can't put an excess amount of weight into these fans or else they will not function as they should and not last as long as they should either. So during your insulation research, I'm sure you will come across Reflectix, which is also a very lightweight material. However, I will warn you, Reflectix is not an insulation, it is a radiant barrier. So it has very low R value, it's a very poor insulator, and it needs a 3/4 inch gap in order for it to work properly. However, like I said, it is a radiant barrier, so I would highly recommend using that to make window covers throughout your van, but I would not use that alone for an insulation. So this is the point where I would be telling you the cons of Thinsulate, but to be completely honest, I cannot think of a single downside to using Thinsulate. Yeah, it's just a great material. I think one common con that you'll see people say is the cost of Thinsulate. In my opinion, it wasn't that much money, especially compared to other options like Havelock wool where you have high shipping costs, spray foam where you need a lot of it. I mean, everything is expensive nowadays, but I honestly can't think of any cons with Thinsulate, and I'm so happy that I chose this option for my installation. With all of that being said, if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this video, it's this. There is no correct proven way on how to insulate a van build, and insulation alone is not the answer. It's a combination of things, like the thickness of your ceiling and your wall, whether you have venting options like windows and fans, whether you have a heater or an AC installed, what kind of climates you plan on traveling in, and what kind of things you plan on doing in the van, whether that's showering, cooking. Not to mention, the more holes you cut into your van, the less insulated it's going to be. So did you install fans? Do you have windows in the back? And the last thing I will touch on is the cab area of your van. This windshield allows so much heat transfer to occur 24/7, and there's nothing you can really do about it. Besides putting up a permanent partitioner to separate your cab and your cargo area, that will help a lot with climate control in your cargo area. Or doing what I'm planning on doing, which is running a thermal curtain right here to separate the front and the back. You can also use window covers for all of your windows. That will help with insulation a lot. So like I said, it's a combination of things. Insulation alone is not the answer for all your climate control issues. So just keep that in mind. And with that, let's get right into the install. Here are the products and tools I will be using. I have my 3M Thinsulate SM600L that is 40 feet by 60 inches. I have a measuring tape to measure the section of my van panel wall so I know how big my insulation piece needs to be. I have a straight edge and a marker to draw on the insulation so that I know where to cut with the scissors. And then to stick it to the wall, I have this 3M high strength 90CA spray adhesive that is also very toxic. So I have a 3M respirator so that I can wear that and protect myself from the adhesive. And then also I have cling wrap that I plan on putting around places like my bunk window so I don't get any adhesive anywhere I don't want it to be. When you receive the Thinsulate, it will be rolled up tightly. However, after you open the roll, it begins to expand to 1.65 inches. The black side of the material is meant to hold everything together, whereas the white material uses air to insulate and absorb sound. The material is soft and itch-free. Before starting, you'll want to cover your bunk windows so no spray adhesive gets on it. To do so, I use newspaper and painter's tape. So the first thing you're going to want to do is measure the area that you're planning on filling with your insulation so that you know how big to cut it. Using the Sharpie and measuring tape, make a few marks on the insulation to indicate the width and length needed. Then, use a straight edge to connect all the points so you have a visual of where to cut. You can use everyday scissors to cut this material. Be aware, by the end of this project, the scissors will likely be dull. It is time to put this onto the wall of your van. So this is the point that you're going to want to put on your respirator for protection. And then you can go ahead and start spraying this 90 3M adhesive onto your van wall. So you're going to spray this whole area. After you're done spraying it, you're going to let it sit for about a minute until it starts to get tacky and sticky. You can feel it with your knuckle. You'll feel it start to get really sticky, and that's when you know it is time to go ahead and apply the 3M Thinsulate. So when you apply this, the white side is what's going onto your van wall, so that the black is on the interior of your van. So with that, I got a lot of work ahead of me, so let's get started. I would recommend separating your van into sections. For example, I focused on the walls, then ceiling, doors, the center beams, wheel wells, door frames, and headliner. Once I determined a section, I cut pieces for all the large panel sections first, then focused on cutting the insulation for the ribs and crevices of that section. This way, you can do all the cutting at once and then glue everything in that section at the same time. This will make the process go by a lot quicker. When measuring a section of the van, it's important to realize that the majority of the cavities are wider and longer than you'd first think. Be sure to take into account the entire area so you're filling the whole cavity with insulation. Also, keep in mind it is better to cut a piece that is too big than too small. A small piece will leave gaps and allow heat transfer to occur. When it came to the vertical ribs in the middle section of the walls, I found it easiest to begin the insulation at the top of the rib since this was the largest opening, and then slowly feed it down the rib a little at a time. I used the other openings of the rib to help move the insulation until it was filling the entire cavity. For the wall's vertical ribs in the lower sections, I found it easiest to start the insulation in the middle opening of the rib and work it all the way up and then down with the same technique of doing a little at a time and using the other openings to move the insulation. For the uppermost horizontal rib, these openings are large enough to fit insulation in pretty easily. Again, I started the insulation in the middle and worked it to one side and then the next. One thing I'd recommend doing is cutting your insulation slightly wider than what you measured so there are no gaps, and it will also help to hold the insulation in place. For the horizontal rib below that, this one can be a little more challenging since there are less openings in the rib and the openings are pretty small. I found it best to find an opening on the bottom of the rib that was in line with an opening on the top of the rib. Then, I started the insulation from the bottom and used the top hole to get it going in the right direction. If the insulation gets bunched up, it will stop filling the rib, so you'll want to take the insulation out and try again. Then, the horizontal rib below that was easy to work with, as it has large openings in both the bottom and the top. You'll want to do your best to cut the insulation as one continuous piece to fill a cavity, instead of multiple small pieces that may leave a gap for your insulation to get cheated. Once the insulation was cut for all wall panels and ribs, I went back through and applied the 3M 90 spray adhesive to a few sections at a time, then stuck the insulation to the wall. Personally, I was generous with the amount of adhesive I used because I didn't want the insulation to fall over time. Aside from spraying the van wall, I also sprayed the white side of the insulation for added adhesion. Give the spray 30 seconds to 2 minutes, depending on how much you use, before installing the insulation. As noted on the spray bottle, you can use your knuckle to check if the wall is ready for adhesion. If the wall feels tacky and your knuckle is dry when you pull away, then it is ready for the insulation. However, if the wall feels tacky and your knuckle is sticky, then give it some more time before applying the insulation. Try to get the Thinsulate in the right place the first time, because it may be hard to adjust it once it comes in contact with the adhesive. After gluing the big pieces on the wall, I went back through the ribs and crevices and peeled back the insulation in select spots to spray in adhesive. I only put adhesive near the top of the insulation to help hold it up in place. I waited to apply the adhesive until after the Thinsulate was installed, because if I would have sprayed inside the ribs before, the insulation would not move through the rib. You will notice I did not remove the black caps from the lowest horizontal section to insulate the inside, because from my research, it appears this rib is for draining out water or anything that gets behind the walls, so you don't want to fill it since it serves a purpose. Instead of insulating inside, I placed insulation on top of the rib. For the ceiling, again I focused on the large sections first, then the ceiling ribs. I used a lot of spray on the ceiling since the insulation piece is larger, thus heavier. I'd recommend wearing safety glasses, or at least spraying at arm's length away from your face for the ceiling to protect your eyes from any fumes or kickback from the glue. Then it was time for the ceiling ribs. What I have found best is to just start at one end and go until you reach the middle using something small like this skinny flathead screwdriver, and then just moving a little bit at a time. You don't want to go too much at a time because otherwise it bunches up, and if it bunches up somewhere that you can't access where it is, you can't really unbunch it. Don't forget, you also need to insulate your sliding door and the two back doors. To do that, you're going to need to remove your manufactured installed door panel that are being held on by these clips. You can go to an AutoZone and get a door trim tool that'll help you to remove these clips fast and easy. You could also save some money and just use a flathead screwdriver. So I'm going to show you how to remove these, what they look like, and how to put it back up once you're done insulating behind it. So back when I did the sound deadening, I did use the tool from AutoZone, and it was a lot easier and safer to use than a flathead screwdriver. Be careful not to poke yourself with it and start bleeding. Now that I've removed it, I just want to show you what it looks like, what is holding it on. When it's compressed and holding the panel up in the door, this top piece is pushed down, so it looks like this. So when you're opening it using a flathead screwdriver or the tool from AutoZone, you're trying to get the tool to go between those two circle pieces to pop it open. Say hello to everyone. Say hello to everyone. Say, my name's Paisley. Are you inspecting my work? How's it look? Do you like it? Does it look good? No! Oh my. So when you're insulating your sliding door, at first you're just gonna see these main three sections to insulate, but you also have some spots up here that continues up. You have some gap right here going up. You have this middle section between these two rows, and then you also have some going down into the doors. When insulating around any wires, be sure to place the wires in front of the insulation so they can still be accessed. Next, I worked on the two center beams. You won't be able to run one continuous strip of insulation throughout the entire beam, as it changes in width a few times. For the center stretch of the beams, you'll want to fill it with insulation before spraying the adhesive due to its tight fit. At this point, I had to order another roll of Thinsulate to help finish the van. This roll is again SM600L, but is only 10 feet by 60 inches. For the two wheel wells, I cut a large piece that could wrap around the whole wheel well. After spraying the area with adhesive, I laid the material flat on the floor to make sure it was centered to the wheel well. Then, I stuck the insulation to just the front. From there, I wrapped one of the sides around, then the other side. At the top, I folded the material into itself on both sides. Any excess material I tucked behind the wheel well rib. This approach keeps the material minimal for wooden boxes to fit over it easily. For the upper horizontal section of the rear door frame, I made the insulation wide enough to run along the top, back, and bottom of the cavity, since all three sides are exposed to the outdoors. Again, I put all the wires in front of the insulation for access in the future. For the vertical sections of the rear door frame, I had to remove the 7 screws holding up the corner covers with a Phillips head screwdriver so I could insulate this area. So I just took off the passenger side cover for this corner, and I noticed down here that it is attached to some wiring. So I don't want to mess with that or remove it. You probably could by pinching it, just removing it. So I'm just going to clamp it here while I work in this corner. A quick side note, if you ever need to change a taillight, this is the cover you'd have to remove to do so. That is why, throughout your build, you should never install something here permanently. I plan on either leaving it as is, or using a 1/8 inch plywood to cover the section, but secure it in place with Velcro so it can be removed easily if necessary. So you're going to notice when you get your van that right here next to the headliner in your sliding door, as well as on your driver's side, you're going to see these blocks that were installed by the manufacturer. I just went ahead and ripped it out, and then I'm taking out these black tabs. So to take out these, I'm just using needle nose pliers to pinch them, to push the thing in so that it can release itself. That's what I found to be the most effective. So you want to make sure that you're pinching right there, not like this because that's not going to do anything. You want to pinch on those two sides to push the sides together, make it a little bit smaller so you can take it out of the hole. So I got them there, as well as on the driver's side over there. For the sliding door frame, there are 2 separate channels that need to be filled with insulation. Once the strips were in place, I went back through with some spray adhesive to help hold it in place. Then, it was time for the last section of the van, the headliner. To remove the headliner clips, I used the same technique as removing the black objects. I had to tug down on the headliner to create space for the needle nose pliers to fit. Then, I found the 2 sides of the clips that I needed to pinch. From there, I squeezed the clip and pushed the pliers upwards towards the ceiling to release it. Next, you'll have to remove this black foam structure on both the driver and passenger side. To do so, I twisted the object towards the inside of the van and then pulled it out. I have heard these foam structures cover where the airbags are, so be careful not to mess around in that space too much. To fit the insulation, I pulled the headliner forward, but not all the way out, as it would be challenging to put back in. Just enough to set the insulation on top. As you can see, there are a lot of wires in this section. Therefore, I did not put spray adhesive in the headliner and allowed the tight fit to hold the insulation in place. After laying the insulation in place, I pushed the headliner back and put the black foam structures back where they belong. However, I did not reinstall the clips in the headliner, so I don't have to worry about removing them again later for the ceiling. Okay, so after installing my insulation in my Ram ProMaster 159-inch wheelbase high top, I can tell you that I went through 2 rolls of 3M Thinsulate insulation. I went through a 40-foot by 60-inch roll and a 10-foot by 60-inch roll, and this is all that I have left of that. And then I also went through 4 bottles of the 3M 90 spray adhesive. The cans were 14.6 ounces. So just using this as a reference, so hopefully you can estimate what you'll need for your van build. Just a quick recap of everywhere I insulated. I have these big panel areas, so I have a lower section, middle section, and upper section. I also have horizontal beams on the top going all the way down. That horizontal beam has insulation, that horizontal beam as well. Do not insulate inside of that horizontal beam, but I did throw insulation on top of it. And then also these vertical ribs have insulation in them as well. Behind the driver's seat, you're also going to have this area from that rib all the way down to that rib, insulation that needs to go in there. And then I of course did my center beams on my driver's side as well as my passenger side. And on this driver's side wall beam, I also had to throw insulation in here. So this is broken into two channels, this one right here, and then this side as well from that rib all the way down to there. And then I also insulated my ceiling ribs. So each of my ribs have insulation in them, and then I put insulation in between each of the ribs. And then I also insulated my wheel wells, and I insulated the framing around my back doors. So there's insulation all up through there and all the way down. Another place where this channel is kind of broken into two, so even though you insulated that in this panel, you still need to fit insulation right there between that rib and that rib. Same on the other side as well. And then I of course insulated my headliner. So I removed this and threw some insulation up there. And then I also insulated around my sliding door. There's two separate channels right here. Insulated both of those. And then of course I insulated my sliding door and my two back doors. With that, I hope this video gave you the confidence and knowledge that you need to insulate the inside of your van with 3M Thinsulate insulation. Tune into my next video where I'm going to show you how I made my U-shaped convertible bed that converts to a couch and table. Until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.